Hello and welcome to a live Kerfefe break on Deprogrammed with Keri Smith. If it's your first time here, this is a live show. We do Mondays and Fridays and just kind of talk about sometimes what's in the news, other times just things that are on our mind. Today, I'm really excited to talk about this subject, although it's somewhat of a heavy subject, but it's something I read a lot about and I want to talk to an expert about. So, my guest today is marriage and family therapist Jake Wiskerchen. Wiskerchen, damn it! I
Every
did it
time.
again, every time. So sorry. Please welcome Jake. Hello.
Hey,
Sorry, I flubbed the whole intro. Well, it's okay. It is what it
I'm
is.
used to it. I've
Yeah,
had my name for 44 years, and I'm used to it. It's all right.
yeah.
Totally all right.
Wiskerchen. That's how you say it, right?
Wiskerchen. Yep.
Yeah.
Let's get
So
the S's on the right syllable.
so you for anyone who's not familiar with you, I have interviewed you before about firearms and mental
Mhm.
health, which was I thought a fascinating conversation. I'm really grateful that you've come back. I wanted to talk to you about mass shootings, which happened to be in the news recently with the Menlo Park shooting and the Michigan State shooting. And I'm someone who, I don't know, I have an interest in true crime and what motivates people to do evil. So I watch a lot
Mhm.
of true crime documentaries and I've seen a lot of documentaries about mass shootings. And what I notice in the aftermath of both the Michigan State shooting and the Menlo Park shooting is that I don't think anybody in the mainstream is talking about what they should be talking about. So what are your thoughts? Am I off base there? Are we having the right conversations around mass shootings? Or is there
I
something
think, yeah, no, I think no, we're not having the right conversations about mass shootings. You and I will have a good conversation about mass shootings. I think that what we're not talking about is how infinitesimally statistically small mass shootings are on the gun death pie chart. And I'm a part of an organization called Walk the Talk America, and you can check out WTTA.org. That's walkthetalkamerica.org for more on that. What we're doing is bridging the gap between firearms ownership and mental health care to get gun owners access to counseling services without fear of rights restriction. That's essentially the core. And at our heart, we're a suicide prevention organization. So what people don't talk about are the suicides by gun. And if I may, I would actually like to present a slide, and I'm going to try
Yes.
to do that with my little share or present screen here. Let's see if I can share my screen. It's easiest with two monitors. Sharing screen works best with a computer. Yeah, I'm not going to look at those tips again. All right, so here's what
You
I'm
do
going to
have
do.
the buttons down at the bottom, right, on
I
your end?
do. I see them.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
So,
Okay,
all
cool.
right, you seen that?
Yes.
So this is from one of our presentations. Uh, that Venn diagram there, we couldn't actually make the pixels small enough to show that mass shootings are as small as they are. So these data are aggregated and averaged. I took the numbers. They're from CDC, 2018 to 2020. You see that there. And for the listeners who maybe aren't seeing it on YouTube, if this
Mhm.
goes on audio only and you're just like driving in your car or something, please don't pull up the screen. I'll just explain it to you. That the percentage of homicides within the firearm deaths is about 38. It's like 37.7 on the screen. Um, and firearm suicides are 58 and a half. So
Wow.
that fluctuates from year to year, but we call it roughly 60. You'll hear people say 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicides, depending on their data and when they learned it. That may not be inaccurate. So, but I say 60%, and people will mentally fill in 2/3. But if you look at the pie chart of gun deaths, about 38% are homicides, 60% are suicides. The remaining balance are negligent, undetermined, etc. But what's really interesting is of all gun deaths, 0.3%, a third of a percent, are mass
Wow.
shootings. So I'm going to just close this out and
And then before you close that out, or maybe you can
yeah,
just tell me
whoops.
at the bottom, you had another figure out of that 0.3%, which are mass shootings. How
Hmm.
many are done with a rifle?
Yeah, so 14% of the 1/3%
Wow.
are done
Okay.
by rifle.
Okay.
So yeah, it's so if you take that 1/3%, divide that by 6, essentially 1/6 of 1%. are done by rifle. So you hear, the AR-15s and assault weapons and weapons of war and all this stuff. It's like, what are we really talking about here? Because if we're really talking about stopping gun violence, I don't like that term because I don't think guns can be violent. I don't know if my thing is still sharing or not, but
It's not.
okay, cool. So I just clicked over the tab. That's good to know. It probably happened when I closed the tab. Actually, I'm trying to work this. I've never shared on StreamYard, so this is fun for
Well,
me.
it worked great.
That's great. So what we're really talking about is if we want to move the needle on gun deaths, and I don't like the term gun violence because gun is an inanimate object. It can't itself be violent. That's not a thing. I have a journalism degree. Words matter to me. So when we inscribe or when we ascribe inappropriate qualities to words and objects, that really bothers me. So guns cannot be violent. People can be violent with whatever tool they choose, but guns cannot be violent. But for whatever practical purposes, we'll just say gun violence, right? You want to stop gun violence. You want to stem it. You want to move the needle on it. You need to focus on suicides. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about mass shootings. And I understand why people would want to stop mass shootings too, because the founder of Walk the Talk America, Mike Sedini, who is a third generation firearms industry leader, was an importer, his family's company for many years. He founded Walk the Talk on the idea of stopping mass suicides, or mass shootings, and then was later pushed into studying suicides and how to prevent them by mental health people, because that's the bigger number. So we want to address this mental health thing. And if we cast the net wide enough, I think we end up probably stopping some mass shooters by attending to people's mental well-being. So if we're talking about mass shooters, usually what ends up happening is we get the typical media push, and they talk about all the things, what could have been done. This guy in Michigan, for example, the one who,
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
yep, please.
Before they talk about what could have been done, why do you think they focus on mass shootings so much to begin with, given that they are a fraction of 1% of all gun deaths? Uh, do you think it's because well, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth.
Take a guess.
Well, I think it might be because, number 1, there are forces that would like to disarm citizens. There are people who would like to disarm citizens, and so they use these mass shootings. But then I also think it's just that it's because it's such a mass tragedy and there's so many people affected, there's so many victims in a mass shooting that it's a different kind of trauma than if you hear in the news about a suicide, to hear about a mass shooting and certainly to get video footage from some of these events like the Vegas one is traumatic. So that's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
what I think.
that's just it, right? So I didn't actually get to it. I'll get to it now if you want. Check out another slide. This one here shows the number of people who died in the Route 91 shooting, because you mentioned it. That was the Las Vegas one in October 2017. And then the number of people who die by firearm suicide daily.
Daily, 67.
So 59 people, which is like 58 innocents plus the shooter, died in the biggest mass shooting we've ever seen in this country in modern times. And 67 people die every day. So we have more than a October 1st Route 91 shooting every day, all year long. And nobody talks about it. Why? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. The reason is it's not sensational. And a big part of what I do is emotional functioning. I teach emotional functioning as the core foundation of everything I do therapeutically, because I have found overwhelmingly in my experience that when people know what their brain is doing in response to environment and label the emotion they feel accurately, they can push through it and return to cognition, which then allows them to navigate life. So what does the limbic system, which is where our emotional center resides, that's where our emotions come from, what does the limbic system do in response to a fear impulse? It says protect yourself. So what does it do in response to excitement? It says pursue. So what do marketers do really well? They scare us and they excite us. Get the new iPhone. It's exciting, right? I want to go get the new iPhone. Oh, let me dig in and see if the camera's better. That's an excitement ping in your limbic system. Fear does the same thing. Oh no, there's another mass shooting. We must do something. Pass policy. Go get your own firearm for defense. Protect your kids. But whatever it is, right? In the late 80s, McGriff, that was the batter, the first
Oh,
baseman for the
the crime
no,
dog? Are you
it was
talking about the crime
McGruff,
dog?
the crime dog. Fred McGriff, the baseball player, got the nickname the crime dog because of his name affiliation. But McGruff, the crime dog, was always, literally barking at us on TV in a cartoon farm saying, protect your kids. 60 kids, disappear every day in this country. And some of them are, kidnapped. And so what does that do? It scares us into paying attention to our kids. Okay, maybe that's, necessary. Maybe it's forthright. Maybe it's, I don't know. But the point is, it works.
Mhm.
And advertisers know this. So, what did we do when we wanted everybody to get shot up with COVID-19 vaccines? We scared them into thinking that they were going to kill grandma. It worked.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of people got vaccinated, right? So knowing your own emotional functioning can be very useful in overcoming this, not becoming a victim to the sensationalized yellow journalism that we're seeing all over the place now. That's why mass shootings get covered. It drives more advertising to the more clicks that you get. More clicks equals more revenue. So I'm not going to drive eyeballs to my website by doing something mundane. In fact, I can't even compete on YouTube. I have a very small YouTube presence, mostly because I'm talking about mundane things like mental health. But I think it's really good. I think what I teach helps humanity get better. I'm trying to make Earth a nicer place to live, but nobody's clicking on my stuff because it's not sensational. What's more sensational is watching some dude fall off his bike and crack his crotch on the crossbar or whatever, like people click that stuff. So that's why the mass shootings get covered and not the suicides. Plus suicides are a lot more private usually, and people don't necessarily broadcast them. But yeah, it comes down to coverage, and we're not aware of the data because they don't get covered.
So we've got speaking of your YouTube, we have your Walk the Talk America YouTube up on the screen, but you're talking about your Zephyr wellness one?
Yeah, Zephyr's got a YouTube channel. It's got one guy on it, me, but Zephyr has a YouTube channel. But I also just posted the emotional functioning videos that I really invite everybody to watch. It's a series of 9 videos. I talk about the 10 core emotions, and it's just me in front of a whiteboard. But I think
Have
it's
you
useful.
considered having videos where a guy falls off a what'd you say, a bicycle or something, and then you do the mental health?
Thinking about it.
Just
I was thinking about maybe just
bring people
strapping a
in.
GoPro to my head and running down the street screaming things or something.
Yeah.
Look at how
Okay.
excited and scared everyone is. But I mean, being serious though, I've had a really good response being a dude. Usually I'm wearing a beard because I'm lazy and I don't like shaving, but I do look better when I don't shave. But being a dude wearing a beard, looking like a linebacker, talking about my feelings, invites other dudes that it's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's a passive suggestion that if this dude can do it, then you dudes can do it also. And the response from that, especially from the gun community, has been great. It's people are like, thank you for doing this. Because of your own demonstrated vulnerability, I allowed myself to acknowledge my own emotions, and lo and behold, I don't snap at my kids anymore. I'm not
Wow.
bitter and angry at work. It's really good. It's a passive invitation to look on yourself and learn how you tick. And I truly am trying to work myself out of a job, Keri. If everybody in the world were healthy and I didn't need to do therapy anymore because they're all solving their own problems and leaning in on their own communities and relying on their own tribes, and they didn't have to get professional counseling, I would gladly do any other work to pay my bills, putting
Yeah.
paint on walls or, driving forklift, or I'll go back to food service because everybody be fun and they tip well.
That's probably
Um,
what makes you great at your job is you wanna do a good enough job that it's not necessary.
well,
But
yeah,
the thing is, I can tell you just the state of the world, you're always gonna have a
I
job
know.
because,
I know.
Twitter is the past couple days, I went down some very disturbing rabbit holes on Twitter. I didn't post about them because I didn't feel like anybody else should see what I saw. It was one of those things where it's like, do you call attention to this and say, "Look, culturally, we have a lot of mental health just growing and festering and being validated as identity." Do you highlight that and say, "Look at this problem," or is it better just to say, "I don't want you to" I in the end, I was like, "I don't want people to look at this." It's like,
Yeah, I do. I put
yeah.
the same guardrails on myself, honestly. I've had those same going Twitter blue, like I paid the $7 a month just for
Mhm.
an experiment to see if it did anything. It didn't, but whatever. But what it did do was the pause that you get before it posts, that 30 seconds. I
Okay, I don't
have I have written and clicked post or submit or whatever the button is, and I see that the wheel spinning and I go, this isn't something I want to say. This isn't aligned with my core values. And so I undo it and I delete it because I realize that like, yeah, I'm increasing people's awareness maybe in my own mind, my own ego. But am I contributing to the conversation or am I just piling on? Am I augmenting people's personal well-being or am I detracting from it? Right. Like I just realized that that's why I started doing dad jokes on Twitter. I was like, I need to start contributing.
I was going to make a joke and say, and yet during that 30-second spinning wheel, you didn't reconsider your dad jokes.
Stop it. You stop it. You love those dad
I love
jokes.
dad jokes. You get me every time. I read them out loud to my husband because some of them are so well crafted. I don't even realize I'm in the middle reading a joke at first. And then I'm like, at the end.
That's really cool because what I've done is I've taken a lot of them and I've reworked them for that purpose. So people are like, oh, Jake's talking about going to the zoo. Oh, dang it. Qualifications.
No. Okay.
That warms my heart. Thank you.
So I took you off topic a little bit so you could answer why is it the media focuses on the mass shootings when they make up such a small percentage of gun deaths per year. So, but I interrupted you because you were about to talk about, I believe you were about to talk about the things that they focus on when they do talk about mass shootings.
This, you sent me this link. It's from Bridge. It's called Bridge, Michigan. It's a media outlet of some sort, and it's got an article. It's pretty good. It's pretty comprehensive. Just entitled "Michigan State Shooting: Anthony McRae Had Guns Charged, Mental Health Problems." Right. Compare that to the clickbait headline of CNN, which says the Michigan State University killer was previously charged with a felony, but was still able to buy guns. Here's why. Now, somebody immediately sent that to me right after it posted, and I looked at it and I didn't even click because I knew what the answer was. I don't know anything about Anthony McRae until just now when I'm reading about him. But at the moment, I knew what that article was going to be about. It was going to explain how he had a gun charge that was pled down, and that's why he was able to buy guns. It's like, yeah, people plead all the time. Sure enough, I did my due diligence just now because you sent it to me, and I read it. That's exactly what it talked about. So I'm going to go to the Bridge, Michigan one because that actually does a better job. So it goes through and explains like what happened on campus, and then it talks about how he's had prior run-ins with the law. He'd once fired a gun out the back of his door at his home. Police showed up. They didn't do anything. This stuff's been covered. And then it dives into, perhaps why. Looks like he had a mom died a few years back. Didn't really recover. Didn't grieve well. And then they interview some neighbors and whatnot. And for all intent and purpose, it sounds like this guy was kind of a troubled loner who maybe went sideways. But here's what they do. I really don't appreciate this. They character assassinate, and I don't know if they're doing it on purpose or unintentionally, but they character assassinate the shooter. And, that's fine if you want to do that, but a media outlet shouldn't be doing that. Journalistic principles say you don't do that. But they also character assassinate the DA and the prosecutors and the police along the way. Because what they're doing is
explain this to me.
So they're stacking up all these things. So I'm just going to go through it real quick. The 2019 arrest is a subhead inside the article. Police officer found McRae smoking on the back steps of an abandoned building at 1:55 a.m. All right, that's suspicious. It's 2 a.m. and there's a dude smoking a cigarette at the back of an abandoned building. Hi, who are you? And according to court records, they patted him down, found a .380 semi-auto pistol registered to him, carrying without a permit. He says, I put it in my pocket for protection when I went to the Quality Dairy convenience store, despite knowing that he should not have carried it without a concealed permit. Okay, fine. He bought it legally, registered to him, carrying without a permit. Now, let's pause here for a second and figure out why the guy didn't get the permit. He could get the gun. Why not the permit? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. Actually, and someone just pointed out to me before we started that that's what the felony was for carrying without a permit.
Correct.
And I was corrected because I felt like, okay, you do have a point. That's not that huge of I have a lot of leniency when it comes to carrying without a permit.
Right.
No, why do you think that is?
I think it's because the permit was not accessible. Now, I don't know that, but I've spoken with enough lower income people, certainly Black people who live in Black lower income neighborhoods across the country who are gun owners. One of whom is, Maj Toure, who speaks very loudly about this. Kevin Dixie is another. Argo J is another. Tony Simon is another, Rhonda Mary. They unanimously, they all say, we can't access these things as a community because they cost more money and they're out of our neighborhoods. You have to go through a course. You have to apply for the permit. You have to pay for the permit. So it's not really about the background check, because you can pass a background check and buy a gun. But what about the permit? Sometimes they require training. I know in Nevada, we require an 8-hour training. That's more money. So you're asking this person who's carrying a little pistol. Maybe he says it's a 380. Maybe it's a Bursa, or maybe it's a High Point that costs a couple $100. You can afford that. Scrape your money together. It's worth it for you to defend yourself in a rough part of town. It's your God-given right to defend yourself as you see fit with the tool of your choice. And he wants to put it in his pocket. Okay. Oh no, we have to make you get a permit for that. So more hoops, more bureaucracy, more fees stacked on top. This is where they get, maybe you've heard this before, but all gun control is racist. That's one of the many planks. And you can hear me talk to Kevin Dixie about this on Noggin Notes back in 2019. We talked about this. He explains it and breaks it down, the historical roots of racism and gun control. But why couldn't the guy get the permit? It seems reasonable to the affluent people talking on the podcast. They're like, come on, man, just get the permit, right? Okay, but he didn't have it. All right, so they talk to him and they find out that he can plead down to a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 2 years. Okay, so he's put on probation. His discharge from it in 2021. That's 2 years. That's it. He did his time. He pled down. Okay, but what the paper's trying to do in this article is paint him as this like career offender. All right, then, and they do a good job, because then they go into, and they did a great job covering that plea deals happen all the time. They even interviewed somebody from the gun violence research or firearm injury prevention at the University of Michigan. She even says it's completely common. This April Zioli. So like, nobody's arguing with this. It's like, but why are they covering it? Okay, maybe an explanation, because people hear this and they go, hey, he had a gun crime, right? He shouldn't be able to have guns. Well, no, he actually is allowed to have guns. They did it properly. But then they go on. They don't stop there. Other run-ins is the next subhead. McRae had 4 counts of driving while his license was suspended. Several run-ins with police for local police for speeding. Listen to the dates here. 06, 08, 07, 08.
So old.
He had a string of debts that prompted court-ordered collections between 05 and 10. Like, this is every one of us. You know what I mean? Like, I had a debt collection letter sent to me because I forgot a chiropractic bill for $30, and they didn't bother to email me. They just sent me straight to collections, which I thought was crap. But okay, so here's an individual who's got some troubles. Most of them are pretty low-lying, and they're just piling on, saying, look, that this is the problem. The individual is this troubled person, whatever. And this is the meta message. Then we go, records show the city of Lansing cited the house for code violations regarding trash and weeds 9 times between 2013 and 2022. This is where he lived with his mom and dad. So now they're character assassinating his mom and dad. Mom died in 2020. So they're not cutting their weeds. All right. They're bad neighbors. I still don't understand how this contributes to like, oh no, he's a bad person. He shouldn't have been able to have guns. Because that was the thematic element of the whole article. And this is really what I see every time that they start talking about it. To their credit, they interviewed a neighbor who said his dad was an awesome guy. He retired from General Motors. He's a Christian who went to church every Sunday. They were scrappers. Mom and dad were scrappers. They'd go around the neighborhood picking up metal from neighbors. And okay, fine. They sound like good people. So they conclude it well. That's great. But why? Why are we painting this picture? And why does every single news article do that to the individual? And better question, what are we going to do about it? Right? Is there some insinuation that this should have been stopped somehow? The system worked exactly as it was supposed to work every single time. He obviously paid or did not pay his debts. That was restituted. He did his probation for illegally putting the gun in his pocket. I guess you're supposed to open carry, which I'm not a fan of open carrying. They had some weeds in their yard, and like, we're supposed to build this into this big, he's a big criminal. He should have had his rights restricted. And if the system had just done its job, this never would have happened. So there's blame on the prosecutors. There's blame on the cops. There's blame on the city ordinance people. There's blame on the family. It's like, And what do you want out of this? We don't live in Minority Report. We can't just be like, oh, you know what? I see this guy's going to possibly commit a crime one day. Let's go in and like shackle him. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
But please go on, because I can
Well,
talk
I
about
was just
some
going to
other
make
ones
a
too.
confession, which is that it worked on me because I did a post, which I think, I regret now, but it worked on me. I was like, oh, look, woke prosecutor, because there is a quote in here from the prosecutor who
Yep.
says, we want
Disproportionately
to,
affects Black people. Yep. I saw
right.
it.
Who said that, who vowed to, I can't find the exact quote, but the prosecutor had vowed to plead down some of these gun charges from felonies to misdemeanors because they disproportionately affect Black people. And so I saw that and I'm like, this is what we're talking about when people say laws are not being enforced. And then I had a friend, before I talked to you, right before I jumped on, a friend on my post was like, hey, did you read what the felony was? It was just carrying without a permit. I'm like,
Yep.
okay.
And it's bizarre to me that there's a lot of things that are bizarre to me, and I'm sort of being cheeky about this, but I'm not. I truly don't understand where the lines get drawn in some of these cases. And the more educated I get about the very widely diverse gun community that I'm a part of now, that I really wasn't before, even though I was a lifelong gun owner, I wasn't in the community. I realize the angles, and there's motives and motivations, and some of them are not quite above board, and some of them are used as Trojan horses to get other things accomplished. So we say, scream about school shootings. Let's make sure that we make sure all our schools are gun free. I just tweeted a quote from my 7-year-old. I'm not even kidding. This morning we're eating breakfast. I'm about to come to the office. We have a snow day here in Reno, and we're just casually eating. And he and his brother are like playing guns, shooting at each other, or whatever, with their little plastic things. And I know people are going to have opinions about that. That's fine. You can have opinions. But he says, Dad, how come guns aren't allowed in school? And I said, why do you think? And he says, because that's how I do with my kids. We do Socratic method. He says, but he just continued. He didn't answer because there isn't a good answer. And he goes, but what if somebody comes in and wants to shoot us or kill us? And I said, I know, pretty dumb, isn't it? We should be able to have teachers and parents defend themselves and their children as they see fit. And I truncated it a little bit for the tweet, but the point gets across. And he says, they need to change that rule. And I said, well, there's some people out there who think that a law and a sign on the school telling people not to bring guns in will prevent that from happening. He's like, but bad guys don't follow the rules and criminals break the law. I was like, 7 years old and you get it. Right. So, back to our issue here. What would these people have this individual do? Become a convicted felon for rightfully wanting to defend himself just in the wrong way? Like, I can carry the gun on my hip so everyone can see it, but then as soon as my shirt goes over it, now I need a special permit? That doesn't even make sense. But you know what it does make? Control. It makes a database. It generates revenue. It creates grifting opportunities for trainers to do their CCW courses. And I'm a big advocate for training. I think everybody should train, and I think professionals should get paid for their professional services. But I don't think the government should be compelling it, certainly not the whims of special interests who may have a desire to make those trainings compulsory so they can make money off of them. I deal with that in my own profession with our continuing ed courses. You think there's not a bunch of people out there who want just chomping at the bit to get mandatory DEI training for counselors?
Oh, absolutely.
They absolutely are. And they do it, and then they make money. So, like, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. But let's take it another step further. Let's say that felony goes down. Okay, he has to surrender his firearm. He can no longer buy one legally. And let's pretend that he likes to follow the law all the time, which records would indicate he doesn't. Then what? Now we've what? Made people feel safe, but not really. And maybe we've escalated the problem. Maybe we've escalated the desperation in this individual who, thinks everybody's out to get him. There were some allusions to mental health issues, but they didn't cite anything, which I also find despicable, because now we've got a journalistic outlet covering hearsay and reporting it as though it's fact. Right. And then putting another idea in the head of the reader that, well, if he had just gotten some care, everything would have been fine. It's like, well, we don't know that he was ill. You're just speculating on that.
Right.
So But let's take it another step further. Let's say he doesn't have a life of crime. Let's say he's just a responsible human being who lives in a poor neighborhood, riddled with crime. The cops don't show up when you call them, if they show up at all. And he decides he's got to become his own first responder, which many, many, many impoverished Americans do in their neighborhoods. So they decide that they're going to take matters in their own hands and they're going to defend as they see fit. They're not aggressors. They're defenders. They've got children. They work 2 or 3 jobs and they're barely making ends meet. And they decide to buy an inexpensive firearm like a Bersa or a High Point to carry. And you just took that away from him, charged him with a felony. The felony, because our criminal justice system is so whacked, doesn't actually rehabilitate anybody. By the way, I don't know why we call it the Department of Corrections when it doesn't correct anything. You get out, you do your time, right? Let's say you do your time, you get out. So you do probation even. You don't even go into the big house. So you're allowed to keep your job. You get off probation, you're still a felon. And you have to check that box every single time you apply for a job or a loan. You've just hampered that individual. Why? Because of a silly law that says you can't cover a gun with a piece of cloth? That makes no sense. None. And there's no path to restoration of that right. So we have to rethink this whole thing. Why are normal good people, quote unquote, breaking the law? It's because they're doing it out of desperation. I don't really like the idea that I have to disarm myself in my children's school when there's a posted sign outside that says, "Come on in, shooters. No one's here is going to shoot back." I don't like that. So, but I'm gonna follow the law because I want to set a good example for my kids.
Right.
But not everybody has that option. Not everybody has that privilege. So, we talk about mass shooters. You and I exchanged some information that I collected, and we can shift gears if you want. But I want to pause and let you reflect.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm thinking about this guy. Like, one of the things I wanted to ask you later on, but I'll just throw it out here now, was what are some of the signs when it comes to mass shootings, since the media and since the politicians and the activists like David Hogg, they're all focused on these mass shootings and they get so much of the public to be focused on them. And since we are talking about them, one of the things I noticed is that they never really talk about some of the common red flags, maybe with some of these shooters.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean things that are there in every instance, but in, several of the instances. Like, I'm thinking off the top of my head, having an overbearing mother or a bad relationship with their mother. Yep. That's in some of the cases.
Did you listen to my podcast with Josh?
No, I didn't. Oh, but I didn't. But I'm thinking of like the Luby shooter in Texas and I believe
the guy who shot up that parade in Illinois.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's several of them. And so just factors like that are not talked about. And so I wonder if you could speak to some of those, or if you would rather show some of the stats that you have there first. Like,
yeah, so I'm going to reference some information that was pulled together by a gal named Tannehill Glenn. She's a psychiatrist in Florida, and we also connected through Twitter. So despite all the toxicity that could be in Twitter, it's been very advantageous to me. It's been very edifying. I figured out how to set good boundaries for myself so I don't make myself nuts. But Dr. Glenn and a colleague put together a presentation where they studied every school shooting, every mass shooting from Columbine in 1999 through something in 2017. And they put this stuff together and they're about to publish it. And then 2020 happened and the world ended. And so it just kind of got shelved. But I'm going to scroll through her little matrix here. What they found was some commonalities. The first thing that we want to do, though, is note that there are varying definitions of mass shooting. So the FBI counts a mass shooting as 4 or more deaths. Federal statutes, 3 or more deaths. Congressional reports, 4 or more deaths, and non-gang related or DV, domestic violence incidents, meaning it has to be an indiscriminate choice of victims. So,
that's interesting. So like the Menlo Park shooting then probably wouldn't count as a mass shooting because they said it was the motive was domestic violence.
Right. So we got to keep that in mind. So there's different ways to filter this, but here's the real key. The one thing that all these media outlets cite is Gun Violence Archive. It's very, very popular. It's actually quite well done, the way that they track their data. But their definition, and they just changed it. It used to be a number of people present for a shooting. Now it's number of people killed or injured, but it's 4 killed or injured. So you can injure 4 people and it counts as a mass shooting, which of course is going to augment the number. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with the reports these days. We've broken all sorts of records for so many mass shootings in America in the first 6 weeks or whatever. It's like, yeah, because you're counting them differently. Okay,
Yeah.
that doesn't take away the horror of having firearms go off in a public place, but
But be
let's be
honest.
intellectually honest about the
Yeah.
conversation, right? And oh, by the way, suicides, because they still don't stack up. All right, so here's what Tannehill and her colleagues came up with. So they started ruling out some things like they would rule out psychosis, like obvious psychosis. So sometimes there's overlap among these, like extremism and psychosis, which would be the Fort Lauderdale. There's January 6th shooting in Fort Lauderdale in 2017. The shooter allegedly presented FBI saying voices told him to fight with ISIS, right? So that's like there's extremism and there's psychosis.
It's both.
Yeah, so clear history of active psychosis, clear instances of domestic violence, because it's personal, right? If I'm coming to your workplace and you're my spouse, that's not indiscriminate shooting. So what we're trying to do is filter out to see if we can get some telltale markers on these people. Okay, so here's what we found. And they researched and overlapped and did meta-analyses, and it's very, very well done. The top 4 things that we can identify with a confidence of, a presentation rate of 85, 78, 71, and 71% each, and then it drops to 50% and down. 14 different shootings were assessed, and this is what we found. 12 of the 14 had social or behavioral problems. 11 of the 14 had depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, or other psychiatric ailments. 10 of the 14 had parent-child relational dysfunction, and 10 of the 14 showed excessive gaming. And then we go down to military interests, awkward social behavior, odd behaviors, failed or non-compliance with treatment, academic problems, perceived bullying, substance abuse. What's important is that we can't do anything about those standalone problems, right? We got a kid who's got some behavioral issues and his parents are fighting or split home, whatever. Maybe there's criminal activity, substance abuse in the home. It's like, okay, we got a swirling mixture of problem behavior. It doesn't mean the kid's going to be a mass shooter. But when you start to get these 4 overlaying with the psychiatric ailments, the parent-child dysfunction, the gaming is a key one that everybody often
That's
overlooks.
amazing.
Because it's isolative, right? You dive into this artificial reality. You're no longer socially connected with people in a proper way. And who knows who you're talking to on there. And then the social behavioral problems.
I would also think the excessive gaming, that a lot of the people in the world that I travel in now, doing podcasting on YouTube and talking with people who care about free speech and individualism and who oppose cancel culture and oppose woke, I think that a lot of them would maybe be made uncomfortable by that fact because they associate it with attacks on gaming or attacks on different kinds of art, like conservative or liberal attacks on entertainment.
Yep. Well, and we don't have any data to back those things up, right? So that's great that you want to put warnings on video games and music, explicit lyrics and all that. I don't have a problem with that if the industry is doing it. I have a problem if government's compelling it, because now they're setting the rules, and that is inherently censorship. So I don't like that. If the industry wants to self-police, like the gun industry, we're trying to get the gun industry to self-police by putting our free and anonymous mental health screenings link on the boxes and in the packaging of firearms. That's great. That's what the alcohol industry did in the 80s with the drunk driving stuff. They said, drink responsibly. My wife and I are actually just finishing up watching Cheers from beginning to end, and it was really obvious how the shift occurred in the late 80s in the episodes where they literally start talking about designated drivers at Cheers. They pushed that all the way through culture. That didn't come from the government, though. That came from the industry saying, We need to be more responsible about this because we see some problems happening and we want to take a proactive approach. Caesars now is doing it with their online sports betting apps, right? You got the Manning family up there. Go bet on your games. But then you also have the Manning family in a completely different commercial. There's Archie Payton and Eli saying, hey, beware of how you're doing this. Set your own limits. There's a commercial with Steve Mariucci doing on a blackboard drawing, saying, set limits, know your limits, stick to them, and then call 1-800-GAMBLER if you got a problem. So like the industry is getting ahead of this is great. I love it. I love protecting children.
But the government, no.
Government doing it is a problem because then you hand over control, right? But here's the thing. It's not one of those things. I played violent video games growing up. I was socially awkward. I got bullied. I didn't turn into a mass shooter. Why?
Right.
I had really good parents. Super solid foundation. So we don't want to jump right to the conclusion that the kids who exhibit these symptoms are going to become violent, and perpetrate bad things. Here's the problem, though. Let's say they check all 4 boxes. That still leaves it in somebody's hands to do something. And if we're talking about absentee parents, they're not going to get the kid into treatment. Principal can only do so much. Child's underage, so you can't compel them unless they do something wrong first. Yeah, it's like, what do you do?
Who's
What do you do?
Who's gonna take care of that kid?
Correct.
I mean, yeah, and the stuff that you sent over about the excessive gaming, for example, one of the things I read there, it said a lot of times the parents allow them to continue with the excessive gaming because it's the only time that they're not acting up or being disruptive or showing these behavioral problems.
It's a distraction.
So then it just self-perpetuates because they're like, let the problem child be, let him be in his own world alone, gaming excessively, and we're not going to intervene because at least we get some piece like a break.
Yeah, I that goes on really often. I feel really bad because I just clicked over and I'm looking at the comments here, and I snorted a little bit, but I muted myself. That Frazier didn't drink as much once he moved to Seattle, and then so he says Lilith drove Frazier to the sauce. but somebody says, I came in late. Your view on gaming is that it doesn't cause the problems; it exacerbates the issues that are there. And that's not what I was saying. I was actually citing some research from a colleague who said that the overlap of social behavioral problems, depression, anxiety, OCD, other psychiatric ailments, parent-child dysfunction, and excessive gaming, all overlapping, can lead to violence. That's basically what comes out. So less common or simply not documented would be like somatic, some like body aches, ailments, that kind of thing, relocation, use of symptoms to manipulate the environment. We're seeing a lot of that these days. This is crazy that she published this or like printed it up, didn't publish it, but back in 4 years ago now, because there's so much presentation of people saying, don't blame me. It's my fill in the blank, right? Oh, look at my poor kid. He's just fill in the blank. And so we're identifying as diagnostics now. It's like, I am bipolar. I am ADHD. He is.
Oh, yes.
And so, well, Ollie Oxenfree, can't do anything about it. And I obviously don't believe in that, because if somebody's coming into my office for help, I'm going to help them. And if that's true and whatever you're struggling with is immutable and irreparable, then my profession ceases to exist. So like, I don't even buy into that. But that is a thing now. And it's very common where people will just dance there. It's like, I have autism, therefore I have no filter. It's like, you clearly are taking advantage of somebody else's psychiatric condition.
Or I've met some people who don't have autism who are just assholes, but they like to say they have autism. So they can say, like, hide behind it. Yes, it's that sort of thing where we've talked about this probably in the first time I interviewed you, where people now, one part of my old belief system is this whole thing about, identity so important, and being everyone's divided up into these marginalized versus, privileged identities. And so now it creates this environment where people are inclined to lean into mental health problems because that gives them this marginalized identity, and like you said, they start claiming it as, oh well, that's just who I am, that's just my autism, or that's just my borderline, or that's just who I am, get used to it.
I don't like the excuse making. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about identity stuff real quick, because if we take it out of the realm of just psychiatric ailments and saying once bipolar, always bipolar. It's not true, by the way. And I did a video series. My marketing guy's stitching it back together where we tried an experiment with reels where we're doing like 60-second clips. So this 7.5-minute video that ended up with like 8 clips. I'm like, okay, it worked. It got a bunch of views, but it's not what I wanted. But anyway, language is very powerful. So in English, we have one form of the verb to be, and it sounds very permanent. So you say I am, and whatever follows inherently sounds like it's characterological. It's like it's who you are at your core. Other languages like Spanish, which I know a little bit, they have 2 forms. Estar in Spanish is to be, but it's temporary. And then ser is to be, but it's permanent. So it's like yo soy hombre, which is like I am a man. So I'm permanently a man. I'm not going to change unless some bizarre thing happens. And then estoy enojado, like I am angry, meaning I'm temporarily angry, but later I won't be. But if you start to say I am a lot, what it tells your brain is it's you at your core, at your character, and there's nothing you can do to change it. And where the danger comes in is if you start saying, connecting who you are with what you believe or who you are with your job. So I always pick on Bob the accountant. I don't know Bob the accountant, but he's Bob the accountant in my analogy. Bob the accountant is Bob the accountant to everyone in his life. And then he approaches retirement and he doesn't know, quote unquote, who he is without his accountancy practice.
Yes.
And it threatens his sense of self, capital S self, such that he has a midlife crisis or something. It's like, I don't know who I am anymore. It's like, well, geez, Bob, you sired some offspring. They now have kids. So that would make you a dad and a granddad. You are married. You bowl on Saturdays. You played softball for 30 years of your life. You also homebrew. I might be tattling on myself a little bit here. So like we want to be careful with the I ams because they start to sound very permanent.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this is not to only just to invite everybody to be very loose and non-attached with their I ams. You could say I am something and I am also many other things. That's fine. That's totally fine. But also be prepared to change, because if the day comes that I work myself out of a job and I'm not a therapist anymore, I have to identify some other way, and I'll be happy to do that, right? Some people can't. And when their ego identity or their belief system, I am a Republican, I am a Democrat, elephant and donkey, right? What it does to the limbic system when that view is challenged is it creates a defensive response. So if I say, I believe in Jesus, I know this is something I kind of wear on my sleeve. Everybody knows this. I believe in Jesus. I try to follow Jesus the best I can. Somebody comes along and says, I think Jesus wasn't God. So my friend Yehuda Reamer, who's goes by the Pew Pew Jew online, he's great, Orthodox Jew, big into guns. He's amazing, but he doesn't believe that Jesus was Christ. Okay, we can have a reasonable conversation about that because I'm not attached to my beliefs. I'm very well strongly anchored in them, and they guide me. But I don't have to get all defensive and uppity because he's like, no, here's why I see it. I go, okay, well, here's why I see it, and we can go, cool, we can still be friends, right? But if you start to question somebody's identity, quote unquote, their identity, and say, I don't know that that's who you are entirely. I think that may be a part of who you are, but let's see what else is in there. People who are not really well grounded and have not examined their beliefs well will get defensive, and that's where we get conflict and fights and friction.
Absolutely.
So I see this happening in the counseling realm where people are like, nope, I was just born an angry person. Nope, I'm just an alcoholic. That's all I'll ever be. It's like, well, good luck with that, I guess, because you've just limited yourself, and I'm not a big fan of limiting people.
I love that you're talking about this. This is another reason I've tried to root out language about myself, that maybe qualities that I don't want to stay in or change.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, I'm always late. I'm like, okay, well, don't say that.
Right. Totally.
Because then you'll always be late,
So,
or whatever the thing is.
I mean, there's a lot of merit to what's going on with the people experiencing homelessness. I have no problem with that, because I want it to be temporary. I don't want people to be homeless in he is homeless, like in perpetuity. I want them to be experiencing homelessness temporarily. The problem comes when the people who are using that language start to weaponize it in defense of being the only ones with the solution, right? It's like, then they start shaming, it's people experiencing homelessness, and therefore pop it up to the top priority and squash all of the things that may be competing. So I like that. I like that people experiencing things, people struggling with, people having, like, they're people first, right? And I like that. I like seeing through the outward behaviors of an individual into the core soul of who they are on the inside, because from that emerges a lot of potential, for great and terrible, but it alleviates a lot of judgment too. Because if I can say, well, I don't know everything about this individual, but I could imagine that if I were them, everything would make sense about the choices they made. Now I don't have to judge them. I don't have to be like, felon,
Right.
Democrat, whatever it is. I can be like, oh, you have a different set of beliefs. How rigid are you in them? If you're
Yeah.
really rigid, chances are pretty strong that you haven't examined them thoroughly. And chances are even stronger that they're not even yours to begin with. You probably just picked them up along the way.
Yes.
And you have a great testimony about that,
Yes.
right? You shook off some stuff that you picked up from other people, and you're like, why am I defending other people's ideas?
Yeah, these are not my ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson helped shake me out of a lot of that, about talking about lying. That one form of lying is actually presenting other people's opinions and thoughts as your own without
Mhm.
even realizing that's what you're doing, because they're opinions that you haven't spent enough time, invested enough time forming. You've just picked them up from your tribe.
Yeah.
That's a form of untruth. And the more I started thinking about that, it was like, well, how many of my opinions are really hard won? And how many of them are just, this is what, well, I trust CNN, so that's my
Yeah.
opinion.
There's
You know?
there's a great way to identify how you're being poked in a blind spot, and it's when you become defensive. It's really
Mhm.
easy. I struggled with a certain one for a way longer than I would have liked. Um, and I was like, why am I having this like reaction every time somebody brings up the topic? And I'm not going to share it because it's kind of embarrassing and it takes too long to explain. But um, thankfully, I do this for a living, and I was very well trained in counselor school and with my supervisors and my colleagues, um, to notice that I was having that reaction to this particular topic. And I was like, this is a me issue. I need to figure this out because I don't want to go through life like tight jawed and gritting my teeth every time this thing comes up, because it's going to
Mm.
keep coming up. And then I figured it out and I was able to let go. And I still have my views, but they're not nearly as visceral or emotional. And if you want to learn more about this, I'm going to show a book right here. It's called Walking Through Anger, from my very good friend and mentor, Christian Conte, Conte. It's not really about anger so much as it is about yield theory, which is something he
Okay.
developed. Whoops, broken spine. Poor book. Not really, but he developed it some 25 years ago now, and it's really about meeting people where they are. And he's using it in the Pennsylvania prison system to change a lot of the culture, and it's working. They've seen a statistically significant reduction in violent and assaultive behaviors among the inmates to staff. Staff are getting better compliance because they're being more humans with each other. It's really, really cool stuff. So
That's
it's
amazing.
about $18 on Amazon. It's universally applicable to all populations.
Walking Through Anger.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's
Thank you for
great.
the recommendation.
And his YouTube channel is phenomenal, by the way. His Christian Conte's YouTube channel is amazing.
Is it just Christian Conte? Is that how we find it?
Yeah, Christian Conte, Conte on YouTube.
Okay.
Website is drchristianconte.com. Dr. Christian Conte.
So I don't want to keep you too long. I did want to ask you about, we talked about some of the interesting overlapping commonalities that are seen in some of the mass shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they're going to be different for the suicides, but since you're talking about how your organization, the organization that you work for, which is Walk the Talk America, was founded by someone who originally, he founded it to focus on mass shootings, and then because of the bulk of firearms deaths, so many of them being suicides, he started focusing on that. Are there any overlapping, like, commonalities that you see in both? Like, there are other things that, if you're
Yeah.
addressing the things that lead people to take their own life with a firearm, could you also be combating the things that would lead people to commit a mass shooting?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, wellness is wellness, right? Um, there's so many similarities, really. I think the first overlap is that both are usually impulsive, insofar as there's not a lot of time that goes into it. Now, we have a little more research on suicide because there's just so much more of it that suggests that if you can intercede in somebody's suicidal ideations in the first few minutes, it'll usually go away, and that can go up to about an hour. But people usually make their impulsive choice to die by their own hand very out of impulse. And so we have a program. It's a little hashtag cause a pause. And the idea is that you put something of significance on your safe, your wherever you store your guns, that will make you pause. And that pause can be psychological, like a memory. I actually have our Guns and Mental Health podcast sticker on both my safes, because I thought, God forbid I ever find myself in a dark enough place that I want to end my life. But if I do, I'm going to go to that safe and I'm going to see that sticker and be like, do I really want to throw away all the work that I've done?
Yeah.
And invalidate everything. So that's my thing. But some people, it might be a loved one. And I understand there's some pushback from the suicide prevention community that says, well, loved ones might be accelerating it because you think you're doing them a favor. Okay, fine. I'm not going to split hairs. The point is to put something that's going to stop you. It could also be something physical. So those are psychological ideas, but something physical, like literally changing the lock or communicating with your loved one or your housemate to say, I'm in a bad way. I don't think I need to be around my firearms right now. Why don't you change the code so I don't know what it is and I don't have access, right? That's where we get into some of this like prevention stuff that state laws deter. You want to avoid a red flag law being effectuated on you and having that extreme risk protection order issued. You hand your guns to your neighbor. Whoops, sorry, background check required. And that's cost and time and all sorts of stuff. So we're trying to get people used to the idea that you don't necessarily have to hand a whole gun over. You can do alternative things like changing the safe lock, or you can take out a working component, something functional like a bolt carrier group or a firing pin. Just remove that. And then, it doesn't matter how many guns you have. You can fit a bunch of bolts in a Ziploc baggie, right? And that's a great way to avoid becoming felons between you if your neighbor needs to step in. So you asked about what we can do to stop it, though. For me, it's prevention. Unfortunately, still today, under the medical umbrella, we in mental health are the only ones who don't get insurance to pay for well care checks. We don't get preventative maintenance throughout the year, like in dentistry and primary care and pediatrics and optometry. We have to render a diagnosis if we're going to submit a claim and get reimbursed by insurance, which is stupid because it basically communicates the message that you have to be broken in order to get care. I don't want people broken. I want them to maintain sense of self prior to getting sick and then shore them up. And if we did a, pop the hood, check the belts and hoses type of thing 4 times a year, I guarantee the country would be way healthier, just getting some professional insight without a diagnosis. So that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see that type of thing move. But in the meantime, as I'm trying to push more information out, through the form of podcasts and YouTube videos and published articles and so forth, then I think people can start healing themselves in their own living rooms and stay out of my damn office, because I don't want you in here. I want you well. I don't want kids being bullied on the playground anymore. I don't want suicidal ideation. I don't want couples arguing and divorcing. I want healthy, functional, highly communicative, vulnerable, intimate relationships throughout our community. So if we can get that messaging out and get off the screens, please get your kids off the mobile devices, get yourself off the mobile device. There's more toxicity out there than I think there's benefit these days. And it's not just the usual suspects. It's advertisers.
Yeah. It's so, like I was saying before, I don't know, so much, just a window to so much darkness in some ways. And I'm worried, not worried, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where things go now with everyone talking about meta and virtual reality and
It's not good.
how they want us to be plugged in 24/7, even more than we are now. AI, all of it. Yeah.
It's creepy. I just saw it's not perfect, but it's a pretty good. There's an Instagram account of a gal who's not a gal. She's just AI generated and she's pretty. And I don't know how long before they start doing OnlyFans accounts with people who don't even exist. And then I don't know how long before models just don't have jobs anymore because L'Oreal or whatever, Calvin Klein doesn't need humans. They can put their product on an AI generated thing. And then the next step beyond that is you combine it with Chat GPT, who can write a full script of a movie. And then you got AI generated actors. You're done.
It's so, oh man, this is a whole nother topic, but maybe I should have you back to talk about AI, because I have so many concerns about it. I'm like,
I do too.
yeah, the fact that it's missing the human spark, though. I don't care how good it
Right.
gets with writing a script or, and I asked just to see, I asked ChatGPT, I'm trying to remember, I asked them to write something in the style of a certain writer, and I mean, I asked the
Yep.
robot to do this, and it did, and it was disturbing, but at the same time, it's missing the spark of just like our music now, I think is too algorithmic. It's like
Yep.
it's missing that
Yep.
spark of
Well,
human joy and
well,
creation.
there was a study a while back, and it was corroborated by Siskel and Ebert when they were both still alive, that human brains enjoy film better on celluloid than they do digital. And I've never forgotten that. And the other day I was listening to Pandora, which I listen to all the time, but I clicked over to terrestrial radio. We have a great radio station here in town that plays a bunch of oldies from like the 50s through the 2000s of just adult contemporary stuff. I mean, it's amazing. But the sound in my ears was so much more peaceful. And I started keying in on that a few months ago, and I was like, there's something to this. And I go back and forth, even in my car, listening to old hip hop because I DJ'd for like 17 years, playing a bunch of black people music for white kids in college. And so like I'm listening to the same stuff. It's either XM or it's the terrestrial radio, same songs, and it's not the same. It's not the same effect on my brain. And I don't know what that is because I don't study neuroscience enough. But I've got a tremendous amount of faith that human beings will figure this out and this will just blow through.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see the digital enhancements. It's kind of like we're doing with CGI. Like nobody wants to watch Michael Bay movies anymore because they're just way overdone. We're like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. More robots. Okay, more
Yeah.
explosions. They're fake. I
Yeah.
get it. Real explosions are different. You watch
Yeah.
Platoon versus Transformers. It's a completely different
It's
experience.
completely different.
So I have faith that we will get through it. I do want to highlight something real quick here. I see
Yeah.
Surly Unicorn talking about broken people bring in more cash, just like cancer is more profitable to treat than to outright cure. You're not wrong with that. So watching other people in distress is a theater of some form, and I think it's horrible. But we can't escape the fact that it pings our limbic system and draws our attention in. So be mindful of what you intake into your psyches. Our profession didn't understand until after 9/11 that we can have something called vicarious trauma. Because what were we doing? We're watching those buildings fall over and over and over and over and over again repetitively. And we all got trauma affected by it. We didn't think that was possible until that happened. Now, they changed the book slightly. They said, oh, yeah, you can have post-traumatic effects if you experience things that weren't firsthand. But then they qualified it and said only if it's in the line of duty. So if it's like a detective at the police department looking through like crime scene photographs or something. So now that we know that it happens, if you're endlessly doom scrolling and you're looking at, bad stuff, or your kids are looking at bad stuff, just remember that you can literally influence your own brain chemistry by where you direct your attention. Choose puppies. Don't look at beheadings in Riyadh.
Yes.
Don't go to puppies, go to sunsets, go to, I follow nature things. Like, I don't care if they seem outlandish and you can't ever go to Greece for a week or whatever, but watch that stuff because it will absolutely impact your neurological functioning. And I don't even want to dive into the pharma debate because it's true. Like it's just true. That I tweeted a while ago that just as the military industrial complex relies on wartime to profit, so a nation at peace is not profitable for the military industrial complex. A healthy populace is not profitable for the pharmaceutical industrial complex. There's nothing to sell to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Jake. I know we're just scratched the surface of this, but I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it. And I would love to have you back sometime. Maybe we could talk about AI because I have a lot of thoughts about that as well. But can you just remind people one more time where they can find you online, and we'll put it up on the screen? What are you laughing at?
Do not let Fauci hear you say you choose puppies. Right under the ELO reference. And I'm like, I'm sitting there, I got telephone running through my head, and I'm like, oh no. Oh, puppies.
There's so
Yeah.
many layers to that joke.
So
Okay.
Twitter is at Jake Wisk. JakeWisk. If you want to watch the videos, go to the Zephyr Wellness website and just search in our media and articles section under the videos. Just put in emotional functioning, and Instagram is Jake Wisk. Walk the Talk America. Take free and anonymous mental health screening today. WTTA.org. That's it. That's all I got.
Cool.
I got more, but
Yeah,
for another day.
Another day. Thank you so much, Jake Wiskerchen.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody, for participating. That was awesome.
Cool. Thank you, guys. We'll see you on Monday. Now here's the awkward moment. I started it with awkwardness, and now I'm ending it with awkwardness.
Staring.
Bye-bye, guys.